Perfect time to do that, I think. We're gonna mute the in-game music here. And hopefully by the end of this video, the raid has almost 25 members. Let's see if we can time it right.
Crown Citadel, the final major raid tier of our current expansion. A place where a legendary weapon is forged, and the home of an antagonist who has been a long and storied part of the Warcraft lore, well before the MMO even existed. Arthas Menethil, the Lich King. This raid has one serious legacy, from its amazing weapons and trinkets, incredibly memorable boss fights, and back in the day at least, world-first drama involving the final boss and some ceramic bombs. Whether you pug dice...
Is it true, guys? Do you think really they accidentally exploited the fight, like it wasn't their fault? Because Kungen has defended himself a lot. I personally am on the side of Kungen on this. I don't think they actually tried to do that. And people did use Serenite bombs in their rotation. Like, it's just what it is.
ICC back in the day pushed for heroic bosses or never got to try it at all. You will have heard WoW players over the years talk about this raid, and for good reason. As ICC, similar to every raid tier in WRAF so far, also tried to do some things differently and take lessons from the previous raid. All the way back in Naxxramas, we just had 10 or 25 player raids. Ulduar briefly brought us hard mode, and Trial of the Grand Crusader switched it up once again, trying the new heroic mode toggle and attempts. In ICC, things change once again. And these days, re-releasing ICC presents Blizzard with quite a few choices. So today I thought I'd go over how this raid released back in 2009, what changes were made over time, and ultimately how things are likely to be different in 2023. This is the legacy of Icecrown Citadel. It's December 8th. 2009. There is a wintry chill in the air as the foreboding gates of WRAF's final raid open for the first time ever.
I was 12 years old when this raid came out, because I'm born 9th December 1996. So the next day, I turned 18. Not 18, sorry, 13.
Though, even the most accomplished guilds are met with
old raid.
Challenges. First of all is that ICC has a zone-wide debuff called Chill of the Throne. This reduces allies' dodge chance by a massive 20%.
Yeah, it's like Sunwell one. Someone had the same thing.
Those who've been raiding for some time were familiar with this,
but it was like to the tanks
Sunwell
only.
Had something very similar called Sunwell Radiance, except that was a lot worse because it also increased enemies' chance to hit by 5%. This was the second expansion in a row where Blizzard did a whoopsie with tank mitigation stat scaling and had to dial it back via a debuff in the final raid. Remember how tanks entered the Sunwell and then had to go and break all the mitigation gear out of the bank and tell the DPS not to ignore their threat meters. I'm not sure it will be that noticeable in ICC,
boss hits really
but your
hard.
tanks are in for a rough time on some fights.
Chat, who do you think did more tank damage, Algalon or Brutalis? Because I remember Brutalis was insane. He would like fucking one-shot your tank. Like, your tanks had to have stamina. They 24k, 25k as a feral, like, it was
found out
ridiculous. It was brutal.
Well, not all of the content was available. And just to be clear, I am only talking about normal mode here. We'll get on to heroic later. Between December 8th, 2009 and January 4th, 2010,
check this out.
Clear the first 4 bosses, that is up to and including Deathbringer South.
Oh, can we go back? I don't want to pause the video too much, but I want to see this.
Clear the first 4 bosses.
With the Icecrown Citadel progression, moving closer and closer to the Lich King Icecrown. This is an old post, by the way. You have seen the development of a not exactly new feature, yet one that has caused quite a bit of confusion. The limited attempt system. Restraint on boss attempts showed first in Ulduar and the 1-hour timer on Algalon the Observer. Apparently Blizzard liked the idea, because then we saw Trial of the Crusader, where players were given 50 attempts to clear the entire place. Was there ever anyone, guys, that took 50 attempts, by the way? Like, they actually wiped 50 times in TOC. Because I think the lowest I've seen is like 42. You know, back in the day it was different, right? Or the remaining bosses would despawn. What? They would despawn? Wait, they would despawn. What? Wait, so you're putting him on heroic and he despawns. It doesn't convert to normal. Well, I guess that makes sense. You could do normal and heroic back in the day. So, yeah, you just don't have a boss anymore. That's rough. Well, the Icecrown Citadel expands on TOC. 2 weeks ago, when the Plague Works opened, raids were given 10 attempts to kill its final boss. 10 attempts. What? That's insane. You only had 10 pulls to kill Professor Putricide on Heroic when it came out. I don't think anyone in the world did that, right? Because when I watched the Paragon, I don't know if it was Word First video, they had 20 attempts remaining on the last boss. On this boss, it was 14 out of 20, which means they didn't kill him until February 2nd. Unless that's not like the first. I mean, I'm gonna show you guys the video for context here. This might not be their first kill, but if you look up here, you see 14 out of 20 attempts remaining. It's kind of hard to see though. It says Word First Professor Putricide hard mode, killed by Paragon 12th February. So it took them a whole month to kill this boss alone. Hardcore wasn't out. Wait, you're saying Heroic wasn't out yet? When did Heroic come out then? Hardcore Professor wasn't out before 2nd. Okay. So you're saying that's when it came out and they just killed it.
Deathbringer Sourfang, whilst the gates further on into the Citadel remained locked.
I wonder which
January
version
5th,
we're getting.
2010, there was
probably
good
the end
news,
version.
everyone, as the Unholy Wing was finally opened. Players now had access to 3 further bosses, being Rotface and Festagut, both of whom had to be defeated before you could take on the end boss of that wing, Professor Putricide. However, this end of wing boss came with a catch. The attempt system from Trial of the Grand Crusader had made a return, and on the first 2 resets of the Unholy Wing, you only had 10 attempts at Putricide before he would despawn
even on normal
for the week. 2 weeks after the Unholy Wing was opened on January 19th, the Blood Wing was also made available, adding Blood Council as well as Blood Queen Lanathel to the raid. Similar to Putricide, Lanathel also had limited attempts, and between these 2 end-of-wing bosses, players now had a shared 15 attempts to get them both down.
15
a further
attempts.
2 weeks later, on February 2nd, 2010, the Frostwing as well as the Lich King fight himself were introduced into the game. The attempt system was updated once again. Now you had a shared 20 attempts between Professor Putricide, Blood Queen Lanathel, Sindragosa, and the Lich King each week. Keep in mind that you could do the 3 wings in any order at this point.
Dude, that is actually really
end-of-wing bosses
insane.
had to have been
20 tries
before you could challenge Arthas. So by this point, we're about a whole 2 months into the raid tier before you can even fight the Lich King at all. Oh, and by the way, in order to start a heroic ID for ICC, someone in the raid had to have defeated Arthas on normal mode, effectively locking Heroic out of the game for about 8 resets. But 2 days after the final wing was out, Arthas had fallen for the first time on normal mode, and it was on February 4th, 2010 that Insidia's fateful and all too well-known Saronite bomb incident took place. Arguments to this day still go back and forth on whether it was deliberate or a simple mistake, but one of the rogues in the raid as part of their rotation was using Saronite bombs, a very commonly employed tactic if you're min-maxing, even to this day. However, for some reason, throwing these bombs was causing part of the Lich King's platform to rebuild itself, effectively allowing Insidia to ignore otherwise lethal mechanics and blast the boss down in record time. Blizzard got wind of this world first and were not all that happy with them, stripping them of their titles, loot earned, and hitting them with a 3-day ban, which would go on to seriously affect their heroic progression. Credit to the first legitimate normal 25-man Lich King kill went to Paragon the following day on February 5th. During that reset, plenty of other top guilds would go on to secure themselves a place in the heroic race, which would begin on the following reset. So on February 9th, 2010, for the first time ever, guilds would be...
So I'm gonna correct myself here. So the way it worked is nobody could do Professor Putricide on heroic because you had to have killed normal mode Lich King to even enter heroic. Does that make sense? So now they can start heroic. Will it work like that though? And should it work like that? I don't know. That's another discussion. Interesting. Okay.
ICC
you just couldn't enter heroic. You had to
were
kill
able to
Lich King
access
normal.
heroic mode. Now the real race began. Alongside this, changes were made to normal mode. Blizzard decided that alongside the release of heroic, attempts in normal now only served as a barrier to guilds who would otherwise probably find some success during the early heroic bosses. Because of this, they entirely removed attempts on the normal difficulty of ICC. And you could very well argue that certain early bosses on heroic were in fact easier than later ones on normal. I mean, who didn't do a loot ship heroic run weekly back in the day? It was, well, free loot. Heroic, however, would keep the attempt system in place, and during its first reset it worked exactly how it used to in normal. Also similar to normal, 5 more attempts were added every 2 weeks, up to a cap of 50. And so reset upon reset went by, and Arthas on heroic continued to prove a challenge. A serious challenge at that. Even with up to 35 attempts total, guilds were still a little way off landing that final blow on the most challenging encounter Blizzard had ever designed. And so on the reset starting 2nd March 2010, a buff was introduced into the game. It was called Hellscream's Warsong for the Horde or Strength of Rin for the Alliance, but it did the same thing for both factions. This buff increased total health, healing, damage absorption, and damage dealt by 5%. A pretty huge aura buff to all aspects of raiding. This buff not only helped out the top guilds push bosses they were barely failing on, but also provided a massive boon to all guilds looking to progress their way through ICC. And 3 resets after this 5% buff have been added. On March 26, 2010, the world first kill on the Lich King.
Wait, so they had a 5% damage buff for 3 weeks until they killed it? I didn't know that. I thought the way it happened was they added the 5% and they killed it instantly. Because they just needed the 5%, but that wasn't enough.
King 25 Heroic was finally achieved by Finnish guild.
That's kind of crazy. Wait, let's see here. So Putricide was the 2nd hardest boss, I guess, by kill date. 12th. He died since Ragosa died 11th, right? But then Lich King was like whole different ballpark.
Paragon, meaning not only did they get the world first normal mode, but also heroic. And here is something you don't hear about too often. His defeat needed a 5% buff to be accomplished. Now, it's not uncommon for an end boss to get nerfs where it's overtuned. Legion killed Jaden, for example. But this back then was a rare thing to happen. Also, Paragon were the only guild to have ever defeated the Lich King 25 Heroic with this 5% buff. World 2nd came 2 resets later by the guild for the Horde, and by this time the raid-wide buff had been increased to 10%.
That's
this
insane.
Buff will be bumped up a further 5% every single month or so. It would eventually cap out on the reset starting 20th of July 2010, and in its final version it gave players 30% more total health, healing, absorption, and damage dealt. And back then you still got all the relevant achievements, loot and so on whilst using this buff. It didn't hold you back from any rewards, it just made them much easier to get over time. And in case you're wondering, there was the Ruby Sanctum 2 which opened on June 30th, 2010 and it was cleared on the same day on Heroic. This was another factor that started to make ICC easier due to it dropping a whole bunch of very powerful items, particularly trinkets. And then Cataclysm would come out on the 7th of December 2010. That's 5 months after Ruby Sanctum and 6 months after the 30% buff was available in ICC. So all in all, Icecrown Citadel progress was very, very long. Not only did it start off with limited attempts on normal mode, it staggered boss releases and locked heroic mode behind defeating the final boss on normal. Over time, Blizzard toned the raid down by removing attempts from normal, extending attempts on heroic, introducing the raid-wide buff, and finally by releasing the Ruby Sanctum. So
it's kind of confusing.
Bit of information for you about this raid, but how should Blizzard handle things these days? I can tell you right now there's no way we are waiting 2 months before we can do heroic. You may remember back in the Sunwell that raid was actually supposed to have staggered boss releases too if it was going to match how it was originally. As far as I remember, the Eridar twins Muru and Kil'jaeden were at least 2 weeks apart and were dependent on your server having fully progressed the Isle of Quel'Danas event. Whereas in Classic, Sunwell opened just after the patch dropped and we could do all the content day one, so I'm expecting no staggered boss releases these days. That's kind of a given for me. In Wrath, however, the limited attempt system has remained, particularly punishing ones too, such as the 1 hour time limit on Algalon, which was removed some time ago now, by the way. Even if we go into ICC with all the content available, with the time appropriate attempt system, you would still have 10 attempts between Putricide, Lanathel, Sindragosa and Lich King week 1. And that would just be on normal, mind you. You wouldn't even be able to do heroic until you had cleared this. Another option is just to drop attempts for normal. This happened back in the day around the time when heroic released. And
I don't think normal should have
20 attempts for heroic, with 5 more being added every 2 resets, maybe even every 1 reset. Alternatively, you could just have 50 attempts right from the get-go, but is that so many attempts where the number just doesn't matter anymore? Part of what makes attempts matter in Trial of the Grand Crusader are the rewards attached to it.
Who the fuck's gonna wipe 50 times?
272 cloaks from a 50-50 run, and the bonus regalia from 45 or above. Also, there are two big problems with attempts.
I think 20 or 30
Blizzard
is
didn't
better.
do them again, by the way. Number one is that if you're in a try-hard
30 is
guild,
probably
your
the sweet
GM is
spot where
going
it like
to
matters,
make you
but it's
PTR
like
the raid a lot
not too
to
much,
ensure
you
that
know?
when the content drops, you aren't failing a lockout for the week. And these days, we have a lot more hardcore players. So if you want attempts, I hope you like the PTR. The second issue is practice runs on geared alts before logging onto your main to attempt a boss. I think I can say these days many of us play more than one character. Rafa the Lich King really does throw gear at you, so your alts are more than likely to be practice fodder with limited attempts. ICC was PTR back in the day as well, by the way. I don't know to what extent, I couldn't find anything online, but when it re-releases I'm sure it's going to be PTR.
Wait, is that Lord Mero? What? Look at him, guys. That's the first boss on the PTR.
And yes, you
He like was one of those giant fucking skeleton bosses. Kinda cool.
but when it re-releases I'm sure it's going to be PTR'd again. And yes, you can always use other environments to create your own PTR, but timings, interactions, that kind of stuff, they're always different on Blizzard servers. Personally, I think you just don't bother with attempts these days. Hardcore guilds will find ways to circumvent it, and I don't know if attempts will really be impactful to other guilds. Will people really be wiping 50 times a week? These aren't short fights or short runbacks like you had with Muru in the Sunwell. Back in the day as well, they
People
had one
don't rate that
entire
much.
year of
They
ICC
rate
being
max
current
4 hours.
content
You're
from
not gonna
its
wipe
release
50
to
times in 4 hours.
Cataclysm. We might have hard
Like, you gotta understand, right? Like, you might, you know, be in a guild in retail that wiped 400 times on a boss. But in retail, it's like, you literally wipe and there's items in the game that res you. So as soon as you die, like, there's literally a pet that can res you. It's just like, res, must res, rebuff, you're done, you pull. Like, you know? It doesn't really work like that in ICC. You gotta fly back, you gotta run, you gotta click the thing, you gotta rebuff, you gotta eat. It takes more time to recover a wipe. So 50 wipes is ridiculous, man. Even on Algalon, right? Whenever we would lose the 1 hour, I think we would wipe 9 times. And that's with us try-harding, DIing people. So when they die, they don't die, they res everyone, right? Like, it's 9 attempts in 1 hour. That was, like, optimal. So 50 attempts, that's gonna be possible in 2 raid nights. I guess they might start doing that again. Yeah, you gotta. I think you gotta, bro. I think once a week is
maybe
not
a
enough.
little bit more. I'd just let people play the game themselves and judge for themselves whether it's too hard and they want to come back next reset or not. What is going to matter a ton more is that aura wide buff. I think it's safe to say these days that our world first Lich King 25 heroic is not going to need a 5% buff to be done week 1. Let me take that back, day 1. World first guilds these days have ridiculous class stacking as well because we know what works so well. It's going to be a really lore friendly moment when about 10 DKs walk up to take their revenge on Arthas for the world.
Yeah, 10 unholy DK. Yeah, man. And 2 hours after ICC is out, it's already clear, you know, this is what it is. And this is what's bad about this, like, is people will look at it and be like, oh my god, this game is so easy, because these guys killed the boss in 2 hours, it's easy. And that those same people that say that, they will wipe on normal mode. But yeah, it's really easy though, because the top players that like practiced a lot and optimized it, it's easy for them. It'll be easy for you right now. Those guys will wipe on normal.
First kill. On top of that, the average skill level of players is much improved. We have better guides, gearing lists, we have programs to sim our upgrades, more ways to measure performance, all of that.
This website provides more DPS gains than anything else we have. I will die on this hill saying this. Being able to sim your gear easily like you can provides so much information and DPS, it's ridiculous.
Kind of stuff.
Back in the day, no one fucking had this.
Back a little bit, buffed
They had it in CAD, I think, but it wasn't that easy.
After 2 resets, there were under 150 kills for Yogg 0 and under 120 for Algalon. Let's just compare this to one of the last hard tiers we had in Classic, which was a pre-nerf tier 5 in TBC.
This was pretty hard, by the way.
Hardest encounter.
Like tier 5, I think 40 guilds killed both bosses, like both end bosses. It was pretty hard, but because it was bugged. This boss was bugged and he would like reset threat, and so did Vash. What's her name? Vash. Like if those bugs were in there, it was pretty easy. I mean, not as hard, right? right? But the bugs
Lady
made
Dash
it
had over
ridiculous.
2,000 kills
And the boss
by the
was a
end of the
15-minute
second
kill.
reset. Also, Classic has typically been the more chill version of World of
That's
Warcraft
like the longest
raiding
boss
compared
I
to
think we've had
retail.
so
I
far.
think that starts to change
This
with
Kale
Wrath and
Toss
Kata
was
though.
so
Things
long.
do start to become notably more difficult, but that's just how the expansions progress naturally. Also, and I'll try to find it, I remember an interview early on in Wrath before the game had even come out, where when asked about this buff, Blizzard said they would consider adding it from the start and letting players choose what level of challenge they wanted. I'm pretty sure that's going to be everyone slams it on 30%.
Bro, Brian is the Brian. He doesn't work for Blizzard anymore. It's probably for the better. Let's just say that, guys. All right, Brian. Yeah, like it's all good.
Right. Rolls the raid and says, "Wow, that was disappointing. So let's not do that." Should rewards be tied to the buffs, such as the titles for defeating the Lich King on 25 or 10 heroic, which are Light of Dawn?
That's a horrible idea, man. Letting people pick 30% buff day one. I mean, I guess they want the raid to feel easy. Fair enough, but I think that's too much, you know. 30% is too much.
Could there be a guaranteed invincible only on a 0 buff, similar to how Mimron's head dropped exclusively on your 0? The buff could impact gear drops as well. One less item on 30 to 20%.
No one cares.
Usual drops on 15 to 5%. And
only if they have a buyer.
0%.
Big
I
buyer.
don't know if taking an item away feels all that great, but using the buff is like using many, many more items. And one extra item would push people towards attempting 0%. But then again, it feels as though we're giving people extra rewards for just playing the raid on its intended difficulty. And even just one extra item is a lot. ICC is a 12 boss raid, that's up to 12 more items per reset. Perhaps you guarantee a certain number of Shadow Frost shards to drop behind what level of the buff is used to mitigate some RNG in your Shadowmourne crafting. Whatever happens, any of these options would be faster gearing and faster rewards. But keep in mind, we're not going to be getting a year-long ICC. So maybe you let people get their biss faster than usual and just enjoy the raid before Kata drops.
Yeah, it's always
also about this buff, back in the day you had to talk to an NPC to turn the buff on or off, and you could not modify it in increments of 5 between 5% and 30%. It was all or nothing. So if you tie rewards to the buff, it may encourage players to change the buff on a boss-by-boss basis, which might make it kind of annoying to deal with. Whatever happens, I think it's more sensible to start off difficult and become easier over time, rather than the other way around. There are definitely tough fights in ICC, but we aren't expecting a buffed ICC similar to what we got with Ulduar. I think the majority of guilds will progress faster compared to Ulduar, even without a buff. The buff,
like we had pre-nerf Ulduar, right? Like literally the hardest version of Ulduar. The only thing that was not as hard is that the gear was better. So that acted as a nerf to the raid. And no one even killed XT. They had to nerf XT to kill it, right? So is this raid gonna be as hard as that Ulduar was? Maybe, I don't know, but once people get more gear, I think it's gonna feel a lot easier. Saying people do so much more DPS. Man. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know much about this raid, right? But I think Lich King is like a fight where, you know, DPS matters, probably, right? Because they do hit the enrage on Paragon video. So if you're doing more DPS than before, it's probably gonna help a lot with that fight, right? But again, I'm no expert, guys. I don't really know all the mechanics, so I think they shouldn't give out the buff in the beginning, but it probably makes sense that at some point you get the buff. I don't know though. That's gonna feel weird. As soon as the buff is out, like if they gradually increase it, or do they release 30% insta after like a few months, then it's gonna feel ridiculous, right?
Buff is a tricky one, but if players can get this items while being 30% more combat effective, they will A, do it, and then B, complain they aren't.
I don't know what they're gonna do. There's a lot of choices, right?
Resistance and all that. It should very
Same
much
with like
be
the heroic
thing
and
so
the
have
attempting.
ICC start in its hardest variation. We can always make it easier later on. Maybe the buff could be considered about 1 month or so before the Kata pre-patch kicks in, or alongside the Ruby Sanctum releasing, so we can just blast the content for a while. It will be unfarmed by that point by the vast majority of guilds still raiding anyway, and it will be a good way for players looking forwards to Cataclysm to catch up and gear up a little bit. Overall, there are a bunch of important decisions for Blizzard to make here in order to re-release this well-remembered raid in a way which caters to different levels of play. I mean,
you know what's gonna happen? Here's what's gonna happen, chat. They're gonna release the raid with no buff. And then like a couple weeks after the raid's been out, you're gonna go on the forums and people are gonna be so mad. They're gonna be like, dude, I can't clear this raid with my soft res run. We're wiping on Lich King normal mode and it's not fair, man. I want to get Invincible's reigns. The soft res raids can clear the raid, you know. Everybody wants to join GDKP. The good players are not in the soft res runs and they're gonna get mad. And that madness is gonna accumulate week by week and eventually Blizzard be like, okay, damage control. Casuals are starting to quit. We can't lose the casual players. Turn on the buff. Fuck it, turn it on. And then the casuals come back, they will still wipe, but they will eventually be able to clear content. But that's what's gonna happen, you know, because like the reality is, in the beginning, this raid is impossible for pugs. Even for GDK, some GDKPs are gonna like, I think my GDKP, would it be able to kill this guy week 1 on 0%? Probably not. But that's fine. Like, we didn't kill Algon on the first week. We didn't kill Yogg Zero the first week. We killed it like a couple weeks after, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I think that's fine, you know. But probably be able to kill like, I don't know, 8 heroic bosses, 9 heroic bosses, 10, maybe 10, you know.
Interested to see what they choose to do, and very much hopeful that it makes sense.
The thing is, you can't do normal and heroic the same week. You know, that you could back in the day. That's kind of weird.
In classic, let me know below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in.
Maybe you should be able to.
The next one very soon.
Maybe they should change that. Maybe you should be able to do normal and heroic. Because we were talking about this last time, right? So there's a concern that you join a raid and it's like a heroic raid. The heroic raid basically, no, not disbands, like something bad happens and people leave, right? Not like you can just leave the raid and then do the raid on normal mode, full clear. No, you gotta start off where you left and then convert it to normal. Do you think people are gonna join? Probably not, right? It's really annoying if that happens, you know? See, back in the day, you could do heroic and normal and 10-man heroic and 25-man heroic in the same, you know, 4 difficulties the same week. And I can do 2. I'm not sure if that's a good idea for this raid, but again, there's so many options. I don't know, man. What is Blizzard gonna do? Limited attempts? Are they gonna do, like, for example, you gotta kill last boss on normal to do it on heroic? What's gonna happen, guys? I have no idea. I started watching this video and I paused it like 50 times when we had 15 people in this raid. Now we're at 17. And now I get whispered, you don't have red spec, right?